Welcome to Wellsprings of Faith. My name is Father Liias. I am a Roman Catholic priest. I'm on the staff as a senior priest at St. Patrick's Church in Stoneham, which is just down the road from our studio here in Melrose. I'm a resident here in Melrose, and this program, Wellsprings of Faith, is about faith, about the journey of faith in a person's life and the fruit of that faith in their life and in the life of our world. I want to welcome to our show this day a really dear friend. I'd say old friend, but she's not old, but I am. But I've known her family since before she was born, and pretty much know her since early, not too long after she was born. And she grew up under my pastorship. I don't know for better or for worse.
Definitely better.
At a couple of parishes, and it's great to have you here. She is a doctoral student, a doctoral candidate at Boston College in historical theology, and we'll talk a little bit about what exactly historical theology is. So welcome.
It's great to be here.
So this show is about you and your journey of faith. So go back as far as you can remember and talk about how you kind of found the Lord and the difference it's made in your life.
Yeah, I can trace my spiritual lineage back to Billy Graham on both sides.
Really?
Yeah, so my mother's mother became a Christian at a Billy Graham crusade.
Oh.
And then my mom was raised in the Christian faith. My dad became a Christian in law school. And the first person who shared the gospel with him came to Christ through a Billy Graham crusade.
Oh.
So I am the rare Catholic who is doubly indebted to Billy Graham.
Well, you know, it's a wonderful image, though, you gave me. I hadn't really thought about that before. I thought of other lineages, but faith lineage of these sort of, not so much the biological lineage, but who brought the gospel to who brought the gospel to who brought the gospel to who brought it to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So.
Yeah, so I was raised in the Episcopal Church, and like you said in your intro, we started going to your church when I was about 11.
Yeah.
And I was really excited about Jesus when I was a kid. Faith came very easily to me. I was kind of naturally excited, naturally kind of interested in the things of God. I loved swinging on the swing set in my backyard after church, singing praise songs. So I don't know what our neighbors thought about "Shine, Jesus, Shine" being sung.
This crazy little teenage girl out
there.
No.
No. This was when I was much younger.
Even younger
like
than that. All right.
6, 7, 8, probably.
Oh, it's 11 you came to our church.
Yeah. And then I first started reading theology probably in high school.
Tell me more a little about your childhood. What did you remember? You were, I mean, Jesus was just a reality to you. And,
yeah.
And you sang love songs to him, I suppose, is one way to put it.
Yeah. I remember.
And obviously you came from a Christian home, the pedigree of Billy Graham, as we just and what was that like? Besides bringing your church, was there a sense of faith in your home too?
Yeah, I would say that my parents really set a good example for me. So my primary image is of each of my parents having a stack on a table near a chair. So there was a Bible, maybe a commentary, and the Book of Common Prayer. So we didn't pray together very often except before meals and at church, but I kind of observed the interior life that they had. And I was involved. I loved being at church. I was involved in church as much as I could, really. I was in choirs of all sorts when I was a kid. We were briefly Baptists when I was in kind of first, second, and third grade. And I was in a musical about the Ten Commandments. I was in another musical about the destruction of the wall and Nehemiah rebuilding the wall.
Was this in the Baptist church?
This is at the Baptist church, yeah. We were called the King's Kids.
Oh.
Yeah, and there was a really popular, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a really popular kind of evangelistic ministry for kids called Salty.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Which is the personification of the Psalter.
Oh.
And he has his band of children, and they romp around the hills, singing praise songs. And this was my first kind of dream.
Oh yeah, wow.
Was to be the kid who sang about Jesus.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah. Well, there's something. I mean, my kind of formation in coming to faith was also through some. It was a little different. I was in an Episcopal church, and they had a boys' choir.
Yeah.
And so we sang, and I was the lead soprano until I turned 12 when my voice cracked.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, I used to sing, this Pangue Lingua, which was during communion every Sunday. I'd be singing basically Gregorian chant. I didn't know it was Gregorian chant.
Yeah.
It was just in the hymn. So those little Catholic seeds were already being planted way back.
Yeah. Then when we went back to the Episcopal Church, I was an acolyte, and then when we started going to Christ Church, I was a thurifer and a subdeacon.
You and my daughter were some of the thurifers in that place. Yeah.
Church was a real home for me. I really knew mostly kind of liturgical, sacramental Christianity, and I felt very at home in that kind of environment, and especially the Eucharist always was, even before I was Catholic, a very important to me. And I remember especially when we started attending your church, and I think you were the first preacher I ever really listened to.
Thank you for the compliment.
And you would often, as the application of your sermon, say, like, think about this when you receive communion, or be open to this, or offer this. And that kind of instilled in me, even before I was a Catholic, this really concrete sense that what was happening at the Eucharistic table was real.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a primary locus of encountering Christ. So I would say, until I was about 15 or 16, faith was very easy for me. It was natural, it made sense, it was a source of happiness.
And joy, and right. Wonderful.
And then there were a number of crises, and I feel like I didn't have a kind of initial conversion in a kind of traditional evangelical sense, but I feel like I've had reconversions many times.
Well, that's actually a more Catholic understanding of conversion.
Yes.
It's a continual thing. And, in different ways, sometimes dramatic, sometimes just kind of slow growth. But what were some of those? Because I know you well enough to know you wound up doing a lot of interesting things with your life. But for the Lord, it was working in ministry and campus mission, all those kinds of things. We'll get to some of that. But what were some of those moments where you felt, something new was happening in your life?
Yeah, I think the first one, like I said earlier, I started reading theology when I was pretty young. I've always been a nerd. I really love books. I really like to understand things. I think I have a really strong existential bent. I'm always just really curious about, like, what is this? Like, what is the world? What is reality? What is life? Really wanting to get to the depth of things. And I found that certain authors, especially C.S. Lewis when I was a teenager, was very helpful in giving kind of explanatory power to things that I knew intuitively. And this is really beneficial on the one hand, but on the other hand, it made me quite arrogant. And for a long time, many of my teenage years, I thought, if everyone would just read Mere Christianity, it's so obvious, the pieces fit together so perfectly, like, there would be no atheists anymore. Like, it's so straightforward, it's so simple, it's so easy. And frankly, I think I thought people who didn't believe in Christianity were just kind of stupid.
Which is the irony, because by and large, it's sort of the intellectual elitism looking down on the simple-minded believers.
Right, indeed. And so what I now understand to be a real severe mercy on God's part is that from that kind of height, I was plunged into basically most of college. So 2 or 3 years of real profound, I don't even know if doubt is the right word, but all of a sudden, kind of the things that I had said with total confidence Jesus died for my sins. You know, God is love. God loves me. All of these things were suddenly absolute absurds. It became total absurdity. So I was in college. I was involved in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, a non-denominational parachurch ministry. And all of a sudden, I was surrounded by Christians who seemed to believe in the way that I had believed. And I felt very alienated from them. It was a really dark time, and it persisted for a really long time. It was really painful. It was really painful. God felt very distant. And I felt like I was trying to kind of dredge up faith. And I would look inside, and I couldn't find it.
You know, what you're saying almost sounds like exactly. I'm in a clergy group, and we read books, and we're reading a book on a CDA. You know what that is? It's a lot, and we've sort of been exploring that and what you do with it, and of course as priests, you know, how we help people through it. It sounds like this was like a major bout of. For those that don't know, it's one of the 7 deadly sins. But it's this experience of just spiritual death. I mean, it's sloth. Now, there are positive ways to look at it too, like John the Cross, the dark night of the soul. But either way you look at it, obviously you got through it, but
I did. I did.
You didn't commit your suicide or
no,
or
but there was. I remember
very. Nihilist,
yeah, it was very clear. There was a very clear moment. I remember exactly where I was. I was in the living room of my parents' house. It was a summer during college.
Yeah.
And I knew it was Jesus or Nietzsche. These were the options. I think I'd read enough Karl Barth at the time maybe to know, but no other kind of religious or philosophical system really was credible to me. And I couldn't do nihilism. And so I remember, you know, I'd prayed many desperate prayers by then. But I think this was the most desperate and really the most humble. I said, you know, God, if this is going to work, you're going to have to make it work. You're going to have to do this for me. And after that, nothing changed kind of immediately, but I had a few like very profound encounters with Jesus in a way that I hadn't before. And then all of a sudden, doing theology became this totally different enterprise, because it wasn't trying to kind of substantiate my beliefs. It wasn't a way of substantiating my ego. It wasn't a way of saying, like, I've got everything figured out. But instead, it was an exploration of a God who I knew and who I trusted in this kind of more fundamental level. So I don't know, I've described it differently over the years, but one way I would describe it is having faith in God is different than having faith in faith. And so I had to be kind of stripped of the faith that came really easily to me as a kid in order to trust God in a more kind of radical way.
Well, that's a really beautiful thing. And of course, God is works. I mean, they're kind of stripping away so that you really are have faith in Him. I mean, it just is. Wow, that sounds. You know, I know in my own life there are times. You're right. Such a difference. I mean, like you, I like reading a book, and I can tell it's really different. Just for the nurture of some intellectual thing, I just start weeping. It's like, you know, I'm crying over a concept, you know, or a theological statement or something. But no, I'm crying because I'm meeting God at that moment, and the reality of God, as it sort of as His light kind of prisms through, you know, a theological concept or something. Yeah, and it's the reality of God, because that there is a big difference. I've said that many times, between knowing about God and knowing God and meeting the living God. You know, like Job, I once, you know, thought I knew about you, but now I've met you. So where'd that then, that happened while you were in college?
So I kind of stuck out college. You know, the whole time
I forget where you went to school?
I went to Johns Hopkins
Oh, that's
University
right. You were involved
when
in
I
that.
was
That's
going to
right.
be
That's
the other
right.
kind of doctor,
Yeah.
the one who's useful on planes.
And was that what you were thinking about?
Mhm.
Yeah, medical world.
Yeah, so I had known, including people who we knew from Christ Church, people who were involved in kind of multifaceted ministries in different parts of the world. So
Yeah.
I imagine myself being kind of a Médecins Sans Frontières or Mercy Ships or doing some kind of medical missions.
Medical, but kind of with a Christian.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I had this whole dream kind of fabricated for myself. But yeah, I mean, I
Well,
stuck
dreaming
out.
is one of the gifts of the Spirit. It showed up on the day of Pentecost. Even women will dream on the day of Pentecost, Joel says.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, through all of this time of darkness and doubt, I stayed involved in the Christian fellowship. I was a leader. I church hopped. I kind of experimented with the breadth of Protestantism. As you know, the Episcopal Church was in crisis at that time. Right. This was between 2004 and 2008. And so there was no real Episcopal church that I wanted to go to. And Christ Church under your leadership was such a unique church that I could never find another Episcopal church that felt familiar to me. Yeah. So I tried PCA, PCUSA, briefly Assemblies of God, and then ultimately I ended up going to an ACNA church that was starting up. So all of this is to say, after these kind of 3 transformative experiences, all of a sudden everything that people had been talking about in my InterVarsity group about being evangelistically oriented, being missional, partnering with God to reach the campus, this all of a sudden took on a very different quality for me. And it was something that I was excited about doing. And the parallel I would often draw is the relationship between St. Thomas and the rest of the disciples. So after the resurrection, they have this experience of meeting the risen Christ. Yeah. He's not there. And I imagine he felt pretty left out, you know, probably kind of angry, but he stays.
Yeah, he at least showed up.
Yeah, he shows up.
Yeah.
And so that's another way that I've kind of thought about this time of college is I was Thomas, like I couldn't leave. I had enough kind of experience of God by that time that I couldn't leave. Yeah. But I needed to my own version of kind of touching the wounds myself. So then on the other side of this, I really wanted to provide this kind of opportunity for college students, wherever they were, if they were kind of cynical or what's the word we use now? Faith kind of breaking down, if they were deconstructing, or if they were curious, or if they would identify as nominal, or if they were super passionate, it didn't matter. Yeah. So at the end of college, my InterVarsity staff worker asked me if I would be interested in joining staff, and I laughed. This is the funniest thing I had ever heard, because I had such a complicated relationship.
And that person knew that.
And that person knew that. But as you know, I did in fact join InterVarsity staff. So I was doing camp college.
There is a key though, something very interesting. I mean, it's true in my own life. I think of some of the worst times of my life and real painful periods have become such a source of grace, not only for me in the long run, but actually a source of grace through me, because as a pastor, and I'm sure I'm sure you were much, I know you got some other education at Regent and all that kind of stuff, but probably that was the most significant education in terms of actually, equipping is too dull a word. I mean, anointing you by suffering. I mean, there's a lot of thing in the Bible about joining ourselves in Christ and whatever that means, and you could really touch the suffering, and there's a lot of suffering out there.
Yeah, and I think I needed to know it existentially.
Yeah, right,
I mean, it was one thing to know abstractly,
right.
okay, there are Christians out there, there are people for whom the gospel makes no sense or is unattractive. And all of a sudden, I knew what it was like to be in that space. And so no matter what kind of student I met, I could say, you know, I will never have your exact experience, but look, I've been all over the map when it comes to faith. So I'm not here to punish you, and this is what I say to my students now when I teach intro theology is, I've changed my mind a bunch of times. I've had this really dynamic faith journey. So wherever you are, I've probably experienced at least something kind of roughly similar. So I worked with undergraduates doing campus ministry for 6 years, and I did a whole bunch of things. But it was in that time really that I started giving talks, and this was kind of my first attempt professionally at doing something that I've been interested in doing my whole life, and still kind of how I understand my vocation is to act as a translator. To say, okay, I have this, at that time, informal theological education, but I've done a lot of reading, I've done a lot of thinking, I've been in the church my whole life. So now, if I'm talking to a student from China who's never heard anything about Christianity, or if I'm talking to a student who's skeptical, or if I'm talking to a Jewish student, or if I'm talking to a gay student, or if I'm giving a talk at my church, how do I take really complicated concepts like the Trinity or the resurrection of the body or heaven or whatever and kind of translate this? And I started getting really good feedback. I started to do some traveling. And that was really the seed of my wanting to do theology more seriously. And I'm an introvert, I'm a nerd. So there was a lot about campus ministry that was wonderful, and I'm really grateful for that time, but a lot of it just wasn't a great fit for my personality. I was planting a chapter, I was meeting new people, I was throwing parties, I was, always out and about, and I really craved time alone, study, So InterVarsity gave us the opportunity to do theology classes during the summer. So I took my first theology classes that way. And I did find myself kind of newly equipped. And it was actually an incredibly healing experience, because a lot of the theologians that we read in the first classes I took were ones who were asking the very questions that I had been asking just a few years ago. And these kind of theological questions that weren't, for me, when we say Jesus died for our sins, what exactly do we mean by that? That wasn't just an academic exercise for me, kind of speculative.
How the atonement works.
But it was like,
what's that mean?
Can I really put my weight on this? Is there an account of this that's complicated enough to deal with the actual way that reality is? And so, I'd had this transformative encounter with Jesus, and then reading theologians who were thinking about these things in ways that made sense to me, that were complex, that were rich. I was like, oh, this is the best. Where were these people when I was struggling? So when I left staff in 2014 to do full-time theological study at Regent College, this was my vision, is I've been doing kind of 80% pastoral care. I've been talking to students about their roommates, and I've been running retreats, and I've been leading Bible studies and worship, and raising my own salary, and talking a lot about sex, and a lot about alcohol, and a lot about family, and 20% kind of teaching theology, forming people theologically. And I thought, how about we switch this ratio? How about I be a theologian, a professor, ideally, but the kind who cares about students personally, existentially, who has them over for dinner, who brings cookies to class, all these things I do now. So that was kind of where my thinking was when I
Wow.
went to do theological study was I'm still interested in this work of translation. I'm still interested in evangelism,
Yeah,
frankly.
right.
But this was also another moment of real crisis. So by the time I was leaving staff, my own faith was starting to deconstruct again for new reasons this time. And so I went away to grad school just to kind of figure out.
Is that when you went to Regent?
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
And what was deconstructing at the time when you say? Do you remember? I mean, what was sort of beginning to be needed renegotiation?
Yeah.
I mean, deconstruction always sounds negative, but it's really you got to take things apart in order to put them back together.
Yeah. I mean, I think in some way I had imbibed and was teaching of maybe what we might call like a psychological version of the prosperity gospel. So become a Christian and your anxiety will get better, or you'll live your best life, or you'll feel more fulfilled, or it was follow Jesus and live your best life now. And that started to become less and less believable to me, in part because I had some psychological things that needed sorting out in therapy. My family was going through some really difficult things. And so there was something about, okay, when we say that Jesus changes everything, what do we actually mean by that? When I'm teaching undergrads, you know, Jesus came to give abundant life. What do I mean? And I just started to feel uncomfortable making invitations to faith when I wasn't quite sure it was what I was saying that it was.
Okay, I see,
And so again, a lot of grad school, and I mean, I recommend and I don't recommend studying the thing that is tormenting you. I mean, I remember very clearly, you know, crying through exegesis one day, exegesis class, because my professor was saying, you know, to read the Bible well, we have to pray. And I was like, I don't know if I can pray. Am I going to fail this class? But again, Regent, it's in Vancouver, British Columbia. It's beautiful. J.I. Packer is one of the more famous people who have taught there. He was still alive. I took one class from him. And I found that it was a very kind of freeing environment. So I had very faithful faculty members who were kind of witnessing with their lives to the truth and beauty and goodness of the Christian faith, but who were real scholars who weren't afraid of questions and who would they kind of provided a safe environment for me to kind of toss about. And then things got worse. Then both of my parents.
We only have 2 minutes left.
Oh my gosh.
We haven't got you to BC, but really we'll have to have you back to the other. But I mean, just to not put words in your mouth, but this sense of these crises, but God somehow, but you're sort of sticking through it. One of the things they say in a CD is don't make radical shifts. Just, you know, persevere. And so you've continued to persevere into your life now.
Yeah, I'm stubborn.
And now we didn't get it all. We'll have to do some other time to talk about you. But then you became a Catholic.
Then I became a Catholic.
And now you're doing Catholic theology.
I am, yes.
But give us a little glimpse of that. But then unfortunately we're out of time.
So during my master's degree, both of my parents got cancer, and I sustained a head injury and lived with chronic pain for about 3 years.
Oh, wow.
And it was in this
brutal,
crucible of suffering that, again, I kind of met Jesus in a different way. And also the Catholic way of thinking about suffering and the way of thinking about suffering and sanctity going together, that became very attractive to me. And so the first Catholic saint who kind of befriended me was Saint Therese, for whom on a practical level, her life was very small.
Yeah.
She died young. She lived in a small space. She
And
was
she was
sick.
small, too.
Yeah, she was small.
Yeah,
But
what a big giant spiritually.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is the church I want to be a part of. This is a kind of spirituality that
Really.
reflects what my life has actually been like.
Wow.
And it gives me a kind of cloud of witnesses to help me along.
Well, that's a good place to end. I'm sorry. I'm sorry we ran out of time. We were talking beforehand about we need to have new shows that go like who's the guy, Joe Rogan, 3-hour interviews.
Yeah.
And you can go anywhere you want and hopefully get to the end. But thank you so much.
You're
it's
welcome.
Most moving testimony. I'm sorry we sort of, in some sense, have abbreviated my dear friend's life. We'll have to have her back. But thank you for the depth and honesty of that journey. And our Lord is with us in all the, He is with us in the high points in our life and in the deep valleys of our life. He is the good shepherd who, yea, though we walk through the valleys, your rod and your staff will comfort us. So thank you for watching, and may God bless you as well. Thank you. Thank you very much.